Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. First, at the beginning, I would like to thank Gregor and Richard for organizing this event and making it to be much more than just about Azure. Last year, we had an Azure-specific event, and I really like how is this year different and how those different technologies overlap. We see some very interesting sessions from different areas, and I like how these actually are joining in together in one event. Today we have Ask Me Anything session about Azure Server migrations, and we do have a special guest today, which is Sarah. Sarah, if you can please tell us something about yourself.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, I'm a senior cloud advocate at Microsoft, so part of my job is helping everybody to piece together the technology in our documentation and make use of it, and try and answer some questions that people have around that. So yeah, that's kind of me, and I'm based in Scotland. If you're listening in the accent.
That's wonderful. Okay. My name is Vukašin Terzić. I work as a cloud solution architect for a company that is based in Czech Republic. However, I'm not currently in Czech Republic. We travel while I'm working remotely. Being cloud solution architect is not that exciting as being cloud advocate, but I still get a lot of hands-on experience with Azure and especially with Azure migrations. So I like that part of it, and I'm also Microsoft Azure MVP. Right. I would like to thank everyone for submitting your sessions up front. As I mentioned, we did get a lot of questions that we can answer today, and I was surprised how people were reaching out all over the social media, on Twitter, LinkedIn, but I also got some questions submitted on Cloud Family Slack channel, and if you are not following it, make sure you check it out, cloudfamily.info. We will try to answer those questions that we have. We will start with these, but also this is a live session, so if you have any questions, please submit them during the talk, and we will try to get to them and answer to them. But before we start with questions from you, with the technical questions, I do have one question for you, Sarah.
Okay.
So it's not technical question. Do you have any like Christmas traditions that you or like in your family that are not related to Christmas in any way, but you still do them every year during the Christmas time?
I don't think so. I don't think we have a lot of traditions. I do like to watch Die Hard on Christmas Eve. That is my favorite Christmas movie, and that's probably the only tradition I demand that I have to do, to be honest.
Okay. Fantastic. Yeah, I also like that movie. Good. So for everyone else, if you have any more questions like that, keep an eye on Festive Tech calendar next week, maybe in the second half of next week. You might get a chance to ask Sarah and her colleagues, cloud advocates, the similar questions, or you can ask them about buying ICEA cat as well. So thanks for the answer, Sarah. So since we don't have any questions yet, I'm just checking the chat here. Do we? Right, now we don't. Let's start with the questions that we already received. So I'm just going to start from top to bottom as we received them. So I combined those. I don't have any names. I'm just going to copy it, paste it here in the chat, I think, so it's visible for everyone. And then I'm going to read it out and try to answer it. And please, Sarah, if you have any questions that you would like to answer, please go ahead and interrupt me. And every time when I, yeah, you can add anything you wish. So the first question, I used Azure Migration assessment to estimate the cost of Azure for 17 VMs instead of having 2 ES6i servers in our data center. Assessment calculated prices for VMs and storage. What else should I add on top of that to get realistic price? Right. So this is a great question. What Azure assessment or tool that it's called Azure Migration Assessment is the first part that you need to do during your server migration if you are using this particular tool, and that is to assess the servers in your environment and get out some information from it. So first thing that you can do to make this assessment more accurate first is that there are some settings that you can optimize during your assessment run, and that is like you can select the proper Azure data center, Azure region that you are going to use. Then you can definitely make changes in if you want to use reserved instances, if you want to use reserved instances for 1 year or 3 years or not, or just pay as you go. You can also make changes in the currency you want to display, and there are a few more settings that you can change there, and this will give you better cost. Then one important question that you can select there is that if you want to have a estimation as is in the on-premises, or if you want to get the assessment tool, find the proper instance based on the usage, and then during this usage you can select like 1 week, 1 month, so longer the better, because you can cover some peak situations and uncommon situations. And so that's the first thing that you can do to optimize that assessment as such. What I see that customers usually do is that they put like a 3-year reservation on everything, and then they use also hybrid benefit on everything, and they get like really low price, but that price is not realistic, and realistically when you migrate to Azure you will not be able to use or you should not be using reserved instances on everything, and also you might not be able to transfer all of your licenses and use a hybrid benefit for all of your VMs. So that's the first part of it. And the second, of course, is that you get only the cost for the computing and for your storage, but there are like a lot of things you have to put on top of that to get that realistic, and that really depends on how your environment will look like. So typically you will use probably like a public IP address. You don't have that in your estimation. If you need it for anything, you will have to add it. Also, during the transition period, you will have maybe some VPN or some network cost. So there are like services that are related to that connectivity that you will have to find the pricing for and put it in your estimation. And then this goes on and on as you start building your environment. Like if you use some kind of high availability for your virtual machines, then that will not be included in your original estimation, and you will have to find what the price will be. So really this cannot be done properly or estimated properly unless you completely like prepare your Azure design. This is great as a first step when you have to give some estimation for the budget, for example, but if you are looking to find more realistic real-time Azure cost, then you have to have like some kind of design and have to know what else you will be using there, how your environment will look like, and then it's just you start adding those pieces into calculator, and you will get more realistic cost. But even then, there's like it's not really like you cannot guarantee that the price will be the same, because all those things are different, and the virtual machine will not run the entire amount when you first migrate it, and so on. But I think this is a good question, and there is no a nice and easy answer to it, but it's definitely something that customers usually try to do and think, especially when they have to convince their managers that Azure is good, and this is what they do at first. So, right. Anything else you would like to add, Sarah?
No, I think you answered that spot on. I think a lot of people think that Azure Migrate will give you the full costs, but in essence, it just gives you that compute and storage, and then you have to remember all the complementary stuff that you add on top of it. Even things like how much work it's going to take for someone to actually use that virtual machine, like the maintenance, the staff costs sometimes can be added into what happens as well. And I think that's probably a really hard cost to factor in and figure out, but it's also something you need to think about because yeah, the virtual machine can run in Azure, but someone needs to be there to press it on and configure stuff and maybe patch it if you're not doing automated patching, investigate the logs when stuff goes wrong. So that can also be a factor as well, especially if you're already doing that cost on-prem, and people think about that when they are comparing what it costs to run a virtual machine on-prem versus in the cloud as well. So yeah.
Right, but even if it doesn't give you a direct cost, I think this is a huge benefit for like initial cost estimation. Because I remember doing the first estimation in Excel table and trying to configure everything or calculate everything in the calculator, and that was horrible. And I only had like 50 virtual machines. Like I cannot imagine migrating hundreds of them manually. That would be very difficult. And what else you get out from this tool is that you get like readiness. Also, you see if there is some problem with your virtual machine, if it's maybe not going to be supported, if you need to change something. So it's very useful, but it's not like that you get
it's not the complete picture, but like you say, it's very useful, especially if, say, someone within the IT department wants to start a migration project to Azure. They can often do the Azure Migrate assessment with little cost and little changes within their environment to give them a kind of rough starting point. So they get some rough cost, they get the rough readiness assessment, and they can see whether it's going to be an easy project and maybe it could be a good sell for their organization, or if it's going to be a bigger project and they need to think about it differently. So yeah, it's a great starting point. It's definitely something you can invest in and have a look at as a starting point.
Okay, so let's go for next. Oh, we have a question from from Gregor. So the dependency question is if the dependency analysis is the agentless, and how many VMs can I run this on? I actually have a very similar question already submitted, so I'm glad you are asking that actually. Gregor, thank you. Dependency analysis being agentless is something that was introduced recently. I'm not sure when. I didn't still use it in production, but just to explain what it is, it's that if you are running application that is like needs a different pieces of software to work, you can run dependency analysis in Azure within the Azure Migration, and you will get all those like bits of software that you need and how they are connected, and it's showing up graphically. How many VMs can I run this on? I actually don't know answer to that question.
I think when you do the agentless migration, which is only available from VMware platforms, it's not available from Hyper-V. If you're doing a agentless migration from VMware to Azure, you can run it in 300 machines concurrently. I'm not sure about the assessment piece, but hopefully that gives you an idea of the scale you can do the migration on. And I think it's probably, I don't know if we have a limit, to be honest, on the assessment. I think more people ask me about the migration and if there's a limit on the agentless migration. So that's stuck in my head. I don't know if there's a limit on the assessment piece, but yeah, it is available. So.
Yeah, and for the agent migration dependency analysis with an agent, and you're right, that's on the Hyper-V, and I have that now configured in my lab, but the lab is pretty small, so I'm sure I'm not going to be hitting any limits soon. Thanks for the question, Gregor. All right, so let's I have another question here. There are two questions from one person. I'm going to copy them one by one. Those are going to be quick and easy answers. First one is, can I use PowerShell to automate migration? So like a few maybe weeks ago, maybe a month ago, there was no full PowerShell module or PowerShell enabled for Azure migration. Now there is. I already did configure some like the whole process of configuring Azure migration and executing migration with the Azure PowerShell. There are still a few things missing. This was announced, I believe, in October, maybe November. So it's something really recent, but there is a PowerShell now, and we can use it to automate migration. I still think that the assessment as such needs to be done manually and reviewed before we start migrating. But for the migration, yeah, we do have now PowerShell.
Yep, and the key thing to note there actually is it's open source. It's on, the source code is all on GitHub. So if you're using it, find any issues, want to add anything, the team will be more than happy to receive your kind of input and pull requests and such like on GitHub as well. So yeah, it's fairly new, like you say. So feel free to add in any suggestions, any complaints, any compliments. I'm sure the team will love that.
Okay, right. Next question. Can I combine Azure Server Migration Tool and Azure Data Box? So for those of you who don't know what Azure Data Box is, it's a service offered by Microsoft that allows us that we order a physical storage from our Azure portal that is sent to us by Microsoft. That can be a size of one disk up to like a whole container of disks, and we can copy our data there and then send this back to Microsoft, and it will be copied then to our storage, to our Azure in the data center where we sent it and to which we ordered it. And this is great for copying huge amount of data that will otherwise take a lot of time and effort to do it over the network, over the internet. However, this takes time. Data can change in between, and I've never seen actually a situation when those two services are combined. And I don't think it's possible to combine it in a way that you synchronize, or you send your data disk or your disk or even the OS disk, copy it to the data box, you ship it to Microsoft, and I don't think you will be able to connect your Azure migration to it, because migration replication is not going just to a storage account. It's not possible to choose where you are going to choose it. This is a part of the service, and therefore it cannot be combined in this way. However, you wouldn't even like to combine it that way because data is changed since then, and you cannot just continue very copied. What you can do instead is that you can, like, let's say, send your data disk that contains a huge amount of data through the data box, and then once it's there, you can migrate your OS disk, your virtual machine as such, and then attach that data disk to that virtual machine, and like other ways of combining this data that was changed in between, there is not a possibility to do it with Azure Migration. At least that's my experience. And what I was doing for a similar scenario was that I was doing something like robocopy and just trying to copy the data and synchronize them and make sure that they're up to date, and then switched over and start using the data in Azure. Okay, question from Richard. Can this tool be used to help migrate applications to containers and AKS? The one that we are using now, or that we are covering here today now, it's the Azure Server Migration part, and that's not, it cannot be used for that. But there are also different areas, different parts of Azure Server Migrate, and these are Server Migrate for databases and also for Kubernetes. But I've never used that myself, but I'm sure that this application allows exactly what you asked, Richard.
I'm actually interviewing the product team in January, and they're going to be covering off the AKS part and what they're doing around that. So yeah, slight plug, stay tuned for that video in January.
Perfect. Okay. Right. So there is one pretty general question. I'm going to copy that now. I'm going to copy the whole thing. So the question is, when to use lift and shift migrations and when to use something else? What other options do we have? Yes, so this is something that you will definitely have to go over to think about the moment you start planning your migration. So the lift and shift is it's like rapid migration that is fastest. It takes less time to do, less planning to do. You can take your workload that you have on premises and move it as is to Azure. So this requires like less time to execute, less planning, and it's fast. However, migrating virtual machines to Azure infrastructure as a service is also the usually most expensive option, because you are paying for a full virtual machine. And then also there is like a management overhead, because you have to go and take care of that operating system. You have to patch it, restart it, troubleshoot it, and so on. But you do have a lot of control. What other options do you have? Right, so if you don't want to do that, then the other options is to start optimizing your workload to run natively in the cloud. And one of the easiest ways to do that is to start, for example, replacing parts of your application with some platform as a service services. And usually how this goes is that if the customers don't have too much time, they want to migrate quickly, they will do lift and shift at first. And then they will start thinking, okay, so what we can improve now, so it works better, it requires less management, and it costs us less. And one of the first steps will be to, let's say, replace your SQL. If you have a SQL running on your server for which you have to pay a license, that server is probably like beefy server with a lot of RAM, and you probably have like 2 or 3 node always on server that is running. And so this will cost you thousands of dollars per month. And you can replace that with the SQL as a service, which is a platform as a service offering from Microsoft that will allow you to get rid of those 3 virtual machines, because as part of your price, it already includes license and it includes the high availability. And you can just replace that part, but keep the rest of your application as is. So you might have some, I don't know, web part and the application part, and then use the database as a service. And this is already some kind of optimization. It's already a big improvement in terms of cost, and actually you don't have to work as much to take care of it. And this is usually a very good investment, because for a little time you can achieve a lot. And then what's the next step would be to optimize everything, to completely rebuild your application and make it cloud optimized from very beginning. And this is something that we don't recommend our customers to start doing immediately with all of their applications. Of course, if you have a business critical application that you know that you will be running for years, and you have possibility to rewrite it, to build it to be cloud optimized, then yes, this is a way to do it. But this can take you from like few weeks to few years to finish. And depends on the size and scale of that application and how much complicated it is. But I've seen this. We do have one customer now who is actually rebuilding their application, and they're right now running it in Azure as is. What other options you have apart from these 3? Well, what we see a lot is that you can decommission. You find out that you actually don't need this, and you can, or you can replace it with something else. You can replace it with cloud optimized application or application that is hosted somewhere else. And the that's one of the way. But what we see is that during those assessments, we find a lot of customers who are actually running some servers. No one knows what they are for. No one is using them anymore, and they just find out that they were for nothing, and they decommission them, and it's not worth it for them to migrate those applications to cloud. Yeah. Anything else you would like to add to that? And this is like the huge part of all the migration planning and everything, and I'm sure that we can spend a lot of time talking about it. I try to make it short.
No, I think you covered it, although one thing I'd say is the discovery of your technology within your environment will often lead you down the path of whether you're going to lift and shift, or whether it's a redesign or a decommission or whatever. The information around your workload might help determine what's happening. And a classic example, I think, is if you've just bought a brand new server that's maybe like a Hyper-V host or a VMware host, it's running the latest and greatest operating system, it's less than maybe 6 months old, that's probably not something you would want to move, right? You probably want to try and keep that on-prem and sweat the asset and sweat that investment that you've made. Whereas the server that's maybe 10 years old, that's running a really old operating system, is probably an ideal candidate for moving, because you're probably struggling to support it because we're maybe not giving you any more operating system patches for it or whatever. And you're probably struggling as well for parts on eBay or beg, borrowing and stealing from friends in the IT industry. So sometimes when you discover and look at your workloads, they will natively give you an answer to where the next step is for them as well. So that's sometimes the way I look at it as well. If you do that discovery piece, if you look at what's in your environment, you can sometimes lead you down the right path with just doing that discovery.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, we got 2 new questions here. So first one, can Azure Migrate help with databases too? Yes, absolutely. Azure database migration is a separate part that allows us to migrate different workloads, databases to PaaS services, or even just to assess them and migrate them to AS. It supports, if I'm not mistaken, like Microsoft SQL Server, MySQL, Postgres, MongoDB. I'm not sure if I'm not forgetting. Maybe Oracle.
Yeah, there's a few.
Yeah. Yeah, so there is a way to do it, and it helps you with assessment and migration as well. Okay, another question from Wesley. Maybe this has been asked before, but what are your thoughts on using size recommendations that Azure Migrate provides? How accurate are they, and what would be the longer term scenario for a customer to right size the Migrate virtual machine? Excellent question. Excellent question. I really like this one. Right. Depends. Again, you can choose the Azure Migrate to give you size as is, and it will try to find the size that is closest to one that you are currently using right now, without trying to analyze what your workload is, how much you are using it. And this can be good, because you know that your workload will be running as it was running on premises, because it's running for years in this configuration. If you move it, you have nothing to lose. However, there is something to lose, and that's because in cloud you pay for, in on premises, you already purchased your servers, you already have that capacity. And if you have available like capacity on your, or computer capacity on your cluster where you are running it, then doesn't cost you anything extra to give extra RAM or extra CPU to that service. In Azure, if you are not using it, you shouldn't be paying for it. And that's where the optimization goes. And that's like a process that you always have to go and always optimize and never stop optimizing. And from what I see here is that if you leave the, and I've done this many times in migrations, where we used the size that was recommended by Azure Migrate Assessment. And sometimes for more critical workloads. We reviewed this, we tried to find something better. Sometimes even I found that the different family of the virtual machines was more suitable for what was running on it, and that's where the Azure Migrate assessment was wrong. But in most of the cases, when you have a lot of virtual machines assessed like this and you keep the assessment running for a month based on the performance, you are sure that during this month all the things that will be happening on this virtual machine happened. And it was like during the peak season, there was all those times, I don't know, when it's making backups and restoring and something like that. And you know that it will have enough, or that it required enough power for you to assume that whatever was given to you by Azure Migrate assessment will be good enough. And in these cases, I left it. But I don't keep track if I was changing this later or not. I believe not that much. However, as soon as you migrate and as soon as you start using it, you will get recommendations from Azure, like Advisor or something like that. And it will be telling you, okay, this is too slow or this is too fast for you. You are not using it. You can spend less on it. So this is my, like, how I do it, how I go through, and it's not realistic that if I'm doing something for customer where I don't know the workload, I'm not the person working with it every day, I don't have any other information than the assessment itself, and so this is how we will do it. But the customers or the person taking care of that application has to say, look, I don't like that. I would prefer if my application has more RAM or something like that. And that's fine. That's fine. There are so many families and sizes of VMs that we can choose from that I never was in a situation that I was not able to find something that fits the need and with the budget as well. Okay. Thanks for the question. Let's see, what do we have next? Right, in our, going to copy that. I'm not going to copy the whole thing, just the question part. Okay, copy the whole thing. So the question is, in our company, we have 8-node VMware vSphere cluster version 6.0 with vCenter. Do we need to migrate to VMware? What are the benefits of using VMware in Azure versus infrastructure as a service? Oh, forgot to move the slide. And vice versa. So I like this question because this is something that we get asked very often. Usually since Microsoft introduced VMware in Azure, everyone thinks that this is what they need to do, this is what they must do. And sure, there are some benefits of it. We definitely see customers that are completely inside of the VMware ecosystem, where they use a lot of other VMware tools other than just virtualization, or even when they are in a situation that their IT already knows how to operate vCenter, already knows how to operate the migrations itself, or the configuration of the VMware. And if you are using VMware tools, you can go ahead and join your Azure part with that VMware, keep using the same tools and use VMware in Azure. But if you are using just virtualization and in a way that you don't care if it's a VMware or if it's a Hyper-V, you just need a virtual machine, then I think there are more benefits of using infrastructure as a service, because you have to manage less things and you can still get what you need, and it's fully integrated. So I hope that answered the question regarding VMware. We have another question from Weasley again, lift and shift or move and improve. We already did answer that question. There are situations where when the lift and shift is like the only working solution, but in most situations we will do exactly move and improve later on if possible.
I think there's also another school of thought, though, to be honest. I think that lift and shift phrase is something that we used way back at the start of the cloud, and we're now seeing lots of people change their idea and actually adopt that lift and shift mentality, because it's not lift and shift. You're not taking the old rubbish and just moving it into the cloud. What you're doing is you can add on extra functionality. So you can add on things like automating your patching, which we haven't really had a solution on-prem, or maybe not an affordable one on-prem to do that. Things like the monitoring, things like just-in-time access, you know, being able to open ports and shut ports and stuff quite easily and quite quickly. There's lots of things you can add on top of your virtual machine now in Azure that actually, if you do that lift and shift, it's not a lift and shift, because you're not just keeping it in the same state. You're moving it and improving it. So you're adding functionality onto that virtual machine. So yeah, some people call it lift and shift. I still refer to that because it's the industry term. But when you really refer to lift and shift, you're hoping to actually move that virtual machine and make it better by putting it in the cloud. Even just the elasticity of being able to up the size of your virtual machine, add on extra disk space if you need it very quickly and very simply. You don't necessarily have to be up at 2 a.m. expanding that disk and waiting for it to grow and your VHD to grow and stuff like that anymore. You know, that's making that virtual machine much better for you as an IT professional and your end users. So yeah, I think lots of people use that lift and shift phrase, but what we really mean is we're moving and improving our virtual machines. That's my take on it anyway.
Okay. Thanks for adding. Another question from Greg. Can we use the recovery service vault, which gets created by Azure Migrate, for disaster recovery scenarios, or is that a bad idea? So we did get a very similar question, and I'm just going to paste that here right after, because I think the answer will be the same. Right. So what Greg explained here is that, and this actually shows the evolution of this tool. Back in the day, we were doing migrations with a tool that was not specifically made for migrations. We were using Azure Site Recovery, which allows us to create like offsite replica from our own on-premises environment. The data and the virtual machines were replicating to Azure, into Azure Site Service Recovery Vault, Recovery Service Vault. And then what we did in the end to switch it over was to perform the failover, and this failover could be test failover, which creates the virtual machine in a separate environment with a separate name, not connected to the network, and you can check it and see if it works, but it doesn't affect the on-premises in any way. Then the other failover was to perform the planned failover, which allows us to properly failover our workload from on-premises to Azure, and this will typically wait for the on-premises part to shut down properly, and then it will start it in Azure, and that's it. The virtual machine was moved. You are not supposed to run the one that's left on premises. And then there was an unplanned failover, which was in the situation when on-premises is not available anymore, and you would just go and turn it on in Azure. And all this information, all those replicas were saved in a recovery service vault. And because of the nature of that tool, we were able to use that same thing to migrate to migrate our virtual machines to Azure in a planned way. And what was changed since then is that Microsoft came up with a tool called Azure Server Migration, which is basically doing the same thing, but it's more optimized for migrations, and you don't have to create like entire disaster recovery solution where you can just use that portion of migration part. But however, the tool works the same way, and and it provides the same services. But to answer now, go back to Greg's question, I don't think that's a good idea, because it's not it's not made that it can run for a long term. You should not be replicating it for years because it's not made for that, and I don't even think you have option to do that. So definitely would be much smarter using the Azure Site Recovery tool to do basically the same thing.
Yeah, I think you need to remember when you're doing the migration project, that's the migration project, regardless of the underlying technology. Once the migration project has finished and complete, you delete those resources, you delete your Azure Migrate, you delete that replica of the on-prem data once you know it's okay in Azure, and then you would start your disaster recovery. And if you're using Azure Site Recovery, you'd be creating a new one and optimizing that for your required disaster recovery. I think if you try to shoehorn your Azure Migrate disaster recovery vault and into your disaster recovery plan, you're probably going to get yourself into a bit of a tizzy and confusing, and the naming conventions might not be right as well, stuff like that. I think it's keep them very clean, keep them very separate. Your migration project is your migration project, and your disaster recovery plan is your disaster recovery plan, and keep the two separate so as you don't end up in a mess. Because what you could potentially end up with is migration, and then someone's coming along behind you and implementing disaster recovery on top of your migration vault. And if something goes wrong and you have to maybe kill that migration vault, or you need to delete it, or you need to start again, you could be killing your disaster recovery plan. So if you keep them very separate, you know that you're not interfering with either project or implementation. So that's the way I would take it, to be honest.
Yeah. I like how Greg is making up these questions, because they let you think about things that you never thought about before. Okay. So another question submitted here. Let's assume someone is moving from on-prem to Azure. Currently, VMs are the way to go for them, which means they will use the Azure Migrate. They have a site-to-site VPN on-prem to multiple branch offices. What would your migration scenario look like? Will you migrate VPN first, create a second one if possible? What would your migration VMs look like? Would you recommend the big bang migration where everything goes at once, or a phased migration? Curious on your thoughts. I like those kind of questions, because you are thinking about the situation of that particular customer, and that's something that I have to deal with my job. So thanks for another question. So if you, as I understood, you decided migrating virtual machines with Azure Migrate, and site-to-site VPN on-prem to multiple branch offices. So if I understand well, you have one central office, and then you have site-to-site VPNs to those branch offices. So I have a customer. We are in a very similar situation now, and what we are trying to do is to get rid of that main office, or not main office, the data center, and move everything to Azure. But at first, what we will be building is not completely replacing the data center, but creating Azure as just another office. So all the branch offices are able to access that Azure, but the main piece is still the data center. And once we are comfortable that everything is running from the Azure, one of the last bits will be actually rerouting that network and recreating that network topology, that everything is actually connecting to Azure, not to the site or the data center. In my case, what makes all of this easier is that customers is using MPLS, and we have express route to Azure, so that makes everything easier. But in your case, with those site-to-site VPNs, I wouldn't. Well, depends what's in your data center, but and if you actually choose to go big bang and move everything at once, then potentially you can recreate those virtual or like VPNs, so everyone is connecting to Azure, not to the central site. But I wouldn't recommend that because that will be a big thing to do at once and a lot of small tasks, and you will not have time to actually proper test things, to properly prepare everything. In what I would recommend instead is to go and do small migrations first, migrate applications with all of their dependencies one by one. What Microsoft likes to recommend in the cloud adoption framework is that you go and you do first like a test migration, of course, but then you move a minimum viable product, which can be described as one application with all of our servers and dependencies, and try moving that and then learn from it and see if you are able to, if your users are able to do everything they need to do, and then slowly move from there. Unless there is some reason that you need to do this quickly, and then the scenario will definitely have to be different. Hope that was a good answer, but maybe I didn't understand the network topology properly. I assumed that there is. Okay, makes sense. Thank you. Right, time is running out. We still have a few questions. I am going to copy now one more. So the question is that there is we run the IT for a small city, and as such, we are offering different services that are completely separated. And if I understand this part, I think it's like a police, firemen, and so on, probably. We started using Office 365 a few years ago, and we are creating separate tenants for each service. We are now starting to use Azure, and we realized that it might be better to use one tenant instead. What is your recommendations? Should we continue to separate in tenants or join them together? We are interested in pros and cons. We are one central IT team. Thank you. So start from the last part. If you are one central IT team that takes care of everything, then definitely for you, from management point of view, will be much easier to use one tenant. And of course, if those companies are different, they can be separated within Office 365 tenants. All of them can have a different like domain for their emails and different configurations. And it will save you a lot of time because you will not have to go and secure every single, like every individual tenant. You will not have to go and, I don't know, chase the secure score or create rules independently in each of those different tenants. Because again, in the end, you are one IT team and this is managed all by one team of people. So for me, it makes more sense to recommend that you use one tenant. However, tenant migration is something that is actually not that quick, and it can take you a lot of time to now migrate and consolidate them together, and it will have effect on the users and so on. So this now in the situation, I'm not sure that I should be telling you, yes, go for sure, migrate everything under one tenant. From the Azure perspective, you're right, it makes more sense because for using those Azure services, also that depends if they're actually users who are using Azure services or just you, the team who takes care of all of it, like of everything. So if you are the one using Azure and users don't even know that there is Azure, then again, having multiple tenants should not be that big of a limitation. But in the end, it will, if you have one tenant instead of many, you will have less work to do.
Although, if they have to stay with one tenant and they can't migrate, we have services that can help you do that. So there's Azure Lighthouse, and there's also Office 365 Lighthouse, I think it's called. We announced at Ignite earlier this year. And that gives you, and it's been designed for managed service providers who look after lots of different customers and don't want to have it like 6 different tabs open within their browser and have different profiles set up. What it allows you to do is aggregate all the tenants that you manage into one place. So you just have to log into one browser and you'll get to see all the secure scores and stuff like that. So if they're kind of stuck in this multiple tenant scenario and they can't move because it's logistically too hard or it's the project timescales or whatever, then looking at something like Lighthouse for Azure and Office 365 could help them in terms of the management point of view. So there's other ways of looking at it. But yeah, it's a very complex question. It would depend on why they actually went down the route of having separate tenants. Because I've seen that happen. I've seen that even happen in departments within large organisations, just because of the regulations, the finance that they organise things in. People want control. Everybody loves control and stuff like that. So yeah, it really depends on the reasons why you're going down that route. But there's tools to help you if you have to go down the multiple tenant route and it's becoming a bit of a management overhead. So yeah. That's one way.
Okay. So another question to follow up on that. What if I have an environment with 2 sets of VMs? One set needs to go to tenant A and one set needs to go to tenant B. So for that, I think this question is related to migration tool. Do you need to configure a migration tool twice, or you can configure it once? That's a good question in that way. So definitely assessment, if everything is together on premises, then assessment can be done from one. You don't have to assess it separately. But if you are using different logins to connect to one tenant and then to a different tenant, then you will have to go and create the Azure Migration project in both of them, and then to migrate them as a completely separate things. Hope that was the answer. Okay. I think I missed some questions. No. Right. One quick question that I received here that I actually am not sure if I know the answer to. It's the question about the Mover. Mover is a service that was acquired by Microsoft sometime this year, I believe. And I don't have any personal information, like NDA information about the service. But what I've seen, and that was announced during the Ignite as well, is that some of the services that were before in the Mover are now becoming a part of the Azure Migration service. And I think that will be the road that Microsoft is going to take, is that it will not develop separate services, but it will combine them probably in the Azure Migration. But maybe Sarah can give us some more.
Yeah, I think we purchased it, I think, late 2018, early 2019, actually. And when I spoke to the team back then about what was happening with it, their plans were just to merge the functionality from MoveAir into Azure Migrate and bring them two together. So I think that's still the plan, as far as I've seen. I think certainly from this year's Ignite, there was still some talk about kind of merging the two services together. That was the plan. As far as I'm aware, the plan isn't to run two services independently. It's to bring the two functionalities and the two products together to end up with one product. That's what I understand. And I think that's still the message that the product team want. But in terms of NDA, don't have anything either. So.
Okay. Another question. I found Azure Migration Service offered in Microsoft Azure Marketplace by some company that is not Microsoft. How does that work? Where can I find reviews about that service? So what I think that the question about is here, that is, if you go to Azure Marketplace, you can find some offers from usually from Microsoft partners. And we do this as well. We do have an offer. It's not on Azure Migration currently. It's in the Azure Governance, where we publish this in the marketplace, and people are able to go there and order it from us directly. And the process for this relies on using the Azure Lighthouse, which is the service that Sarah already mentioned, and it's the service for multi-tenant management, allowing partners to manage things from one place, multiple tenants and their customers and everything from one place. And in this offer, like when you have to create this offer, it has multiple steps. First one is, of course, you add information, descriptions and everything. And then you also enter the required access in the environment of the customer. And so if customers go and purchase the offer from you, then you will automatically see their tenant under your Azure Lighthouse, and you will already have the access on the level that it was included in the offer. And this is something that, like as I said, we do. It makes everything easier because you get access immediately, and access is okay. So I think that's the wrap up of our today's festive tech calendar session about Azure Server migrations. Thanks everyone for joining us. Thank you, Sarah, for accepting my invitation and for providing all the answers. If anyone wants to get in touch with us, you can find our contacts. And also, I just wanted to mention that if you are interested in Azure Server migrations, there is a lot of resources that you can find on Microsoft. There are entire Learn modules that you can go and follow and learn step by step. There are even like labs included in the sandbox that's provided to you by Microsoft that you can go and try some things. So definitely a lot of resources to follow. So I hope. I also hope these answers were useful, and thank you one more time, and have a great day, everyone.